Okay, round two. Uh, One thing I saw today, just making these little videos to help improve my camera presence for job prospects in the future in library science. And I don't even know if I'll find work in library science, but I'm taking technology certification classes there, and I've become aware that I'm terrible on camera. I yell at the camera. I don't look at the camera I'm looking now, but a lot of times I'm looking down at me at the video of me there. So I'm just gonna practice looking at the camera. And one thing I talk about just random stuff on here, I guess. And one thing I can talk about today is I saw a video of protesters in Georgia, I think it was the Republic of Georgia, and they were being beaten in the street by these masked kind of, I don't even know what side of the aisle they were on. They seemed like kind of fascist thugs, but I don't know if they were fascist. I don't know a lot about the situation. It was just Amnesty International video. And I started thinking, like, this type of violence or this thuggery where you have these kind of political organizations going around beating up other political people. And this was like a woman, it was like a middle-aged woman being beaten by a big giant guy. And uh, I started thinking that, like, all these brutality that we're having in our society that's been pushed, like, for instance, like tribal team sport brawls, where you have these team sport brawls. Now it's like a sport where they're literally in an arena and they're fighting each other like a team sport brawl. And to me, this is like harkening back to like the old times, like ancient brutality, and we're introducing it into a modern form, and it's conditioning people to just accept violence and brutality and as the norm. And so I think what it's all about is political violence. So conditioning people to accept political violence, and that's what I think is going on with that. And it makes me feel like I don't have kids. I'm probably not going to have kids or whatever, but it makes me feel like I would not want to raise a son in this type of, or maybe even a girl, or any, or if they're transgender or any type of person. I would not want to raise them in this type of environment where it's just this total insanity that goes on. And I actually mentioned this in a book that I'm writing and talking about it right here. But uh, it's become so vicious and brutal. Every, like, just normalized sport. UFC used to be the crazy thing, and now it's the tame thing. And like I say, I saw this video of in Amnesty International of people being brutalized on the streets in Georgia, and I thought to myself, yeah, it's starting to get into our politics in the world, and these like street fights as show of power and to intimidate people into being silent and stuff. And that's just one example of it happening in a particular spot. And so uh, I don't know exactly what was transpiring there, but I just started thinking, like, yeah, all this violent sports that we're seeing, it's all about. We've seen it in our own country in America, where you had these like kind of fight club brawls between Antifa and Proud Boys, and the dominant people were the Proud Boys or whatever, and then they rose to power on their dominance. Like, people flock to the violence, people flock to the power people. They say they back the people who are in power. So they got in the street and they were the dominant people, and now Trump is president, and And I'm not saying that you want to be the dominant people in the street, because whenever you're playing the violent game, I feel like as a someone that's kind of on the left, you're gonna lose that game, because it's a selfish act. It's a selfish act to be violent. You're taking harm on another person, and the people that are gonna do that to the betterment of themselves are gonna be people that are selfish. So uh, it's a losing proposition in my opinion. And so I'll just say that. Another thing I was talking about was in the last video, I talked about Mehmet Oz being the head of Medicare, and this is on the heels of Stephanie McMahon, I think it is, or like McMahon's daughter, Vince McMahon's daughter, who is the head of the World Wrestling Federation, becoming head of the Department of Education. And so that's just Trump is like trying to say something like he's either trying to use the idea that it's a mock government to his advantage, or he really is throwing this out there like, hey, this is a mock government, and it's such a joke that I'm going to do this right out in the open. So he's apparently trying to say something with Oz and Mem and all that. And so that's kind of what I was talking about with Wicked, is like now this wicked Nazi guy, after 20 years of the Wicked Witch being heralded as the good person in a mythology that was kind of foundational to American society for a long time. And so now here comes this wicked guy, and everyone's telling you, no, he's good. Yeah, Trump is good. No, he just wants to get rid of the bad people, like all the immigrants, and he wants to fight the trans, or I don't know what people think or whatever, but like uh you know it's just like, anyways, I'm gonna go off kilter here, but the point I was trying to make is that it's crazy that this guy is considered good by a lot of people when he was praising Hitler's generals, and he was basically running on a Nazi type platform. It was so obvious. A 10th grader from the 90s would have been like, hey, that's like what they're talking about in our class right here, guys. This is like a Hitler guy. And people are like, yeah, but my eggs are $5, or I mean, so and so I suppose that's a real problem, but like then you see he's like, well, he wants to deport all the food production workers that are immigrants. And so you're like, well, he's that's not going to make the price of eggs go down. So is that really what it's about? Is it really about the price of eggs, or is it about you having an elevated status over other people? That's I don't I don't really understand it. Uh, I'm not going to pretend to understand it, and I'm not going to pretend that it's okay. So, anyways, these are going to start to turn into like little offshoots, but I'm going to talk about random stuff. I don't think I looked at the camera, so hopefully I looked at the camera. I'm going to look at this video, and this is round two, and I'm going to do 2 rounds a day probably and call it quits. Okay, bye.